Hello, everybody. It's Andrew Gums here with our podcast, Artificial Intelligence and Cybersurgery. This is the official podcast for our journal, Artificial Intelligence Surgery. And that is the only, or I should say, first journal that is dedicated exclusively to surgery and artificial intelligence. We are here with our 50th episode. We're here with Ivan George. We are incredibly honored and proud to have him, but I will let my co-host, Vincent Grasso, do the rest of the honors in introducing Ivan to our audience.
Sure, and thank you, Andrew. It's exciting to be at 50, and we're excited to have Ivan on our call because he's involved in some very interesting work down at Johns Hopkins. I'm sure you can take a look at his LinkedIn profile. It's very impressive. We're very interested in learning more about all the simulation and surgical education work that you're doing down there as I guess you're the administrative director down there. And you're also on the leadership team in the Chesapeake regional chapters for health technology and the Maryland Tech Council. So you've got your hands in a lot of interesting strategic things, education things, and at the top of the pyramid down at Hopkins. So welcome to our 50th podcast. And if you can introduce yourself to the audience, we'll get on with our discussion. Thank you for coming on early this morning.
It's nice to be here, Vincent, Andrew. I am honored to be here. I have heard such good things about this, so I'm glad to be here. Yeah, no, as an introduction, I am, for full disclosure, I'm not a physician, but I probably come close to one of the few people on the planet you'll meet that can probably fool someone for a few weeks at least. I was headed down that path when I was much younger, and for a lot of life reasons, I ended up off the rails a little, but I wanted to make it very difficult for anyone to say no to me. And then things just kept happening in kind of this reverse order. And next thing I know, I was for 16 years leadership in the operating rooms at University of Kentucky, and I was responsible as the anesthesia assistant, chief anesthesia assistant, responsible for basically being the proxy for the chair and vice chair of anesthesia. And they really gave me a lot of room. And during the late 80s and 90s, that could be done. And then in around 2000, I decided, hey, I was going to go back to med school and I was going to, take that run. And I need to get out of the, liver transplants and cardiac transplants and trauma teams and being up, 24-hour calls and all that. And I thought, now's the chance. And so I joined a fellow by the name of, you all know him well, Dr. Adrian Park, who's one of the pioneers in minimally invasive surgery. So I went from one group of internationally known anesthesiologists to another group of, another individual who was in rarefied surgical space. And I had in college a computer science background. I was part of that group that first used the Apple IIes and the Commodore PETs. And so I was part of that generation that could write code. And so that had been my minor, but it was always pre-med sciences. And then in high school, in college, my other part-time job when I wasn't working in hospitals in all sorts of different ancillary roles, from radiology to physical therapy to, I was just doing it all. I was working construction and learning everything from drywalling to electrical and whatever at the college where my dad was the chair and ultimately the dean. And it's that weird hybridization that really helped out when I met Dr. Park. Adrian had, a real visionary view of MIS being at kind of this crossroads, and for whatever reason, I just got what he was trying to do. And if you're trying to build a sim center and you've been an OR manager, you know how to fake it in ways that simulation and education experts might not consider. You understand the technologies that are coming in, and you might see things that a GYN's doing that an MIS person would never think about. It's so funny how the silos are really marked. Anyway, that progressed to University of Maryland with Adrian, to Anne Arundel Medical Center, and ultimately to Johns Hopkins. Along the way, as time went by, I was given some unique tasks. It's an unusual situation for me to be able to, fire up an email and get a hold of at least 5 or 6 past SAGES presidents or talk to heads of industry. And so those doors were opened by Adrian and his peers. I'd like to think I spoke intelligently to that. And so early work was around taking volumetric data and turning it into preoperative planning, which speaks to finite geometry, which speaks to virtual reality and augmented reality, which converges with, deep machine learning needs and converges with, as you call it, cybersurgery or robotic surgery. And that turned into being asked to help write the IFU for an early competitor to Da Vinci, which was the Titan Sport under Dr. Fowler and Adrian. And then later on being asked to help develop as a consultant the education program for now. I don't want to speak poorly of it, but it's just in a pause phase, but human extensions for their Handex. And so, and then lately getting to be really heavily involved in trying to get the mantra over here. So I think the way I described it in at an ACS meeting recently, and I'm one of the few non-surgeon ACS chairs for about 10 years in the VR, actually in the Sim and Tech Committee. For about 10 to 15 years, I was a co-chair. I describe myself now as the fly on the wall at 30,000 feet. I'm not someone who's going to get into bent science in great depth, but I think I can speak to a lot of different things. And I'm starting to get folks to see that maybe that cross-pollination that I bring to the table can sometimes be meaningful. Also, it can also be overwhelming because it's a bit of an undisciplined mind, right? So where you all have been very focused, sometimes my leaders are like trying to contain me, and sometimes it can be seen as boiling the ocean, and sometimes what it really is doing is recognizing convergence points that others don't. And for me, the challenge is to recognize when I'm trying to boil the ocean and when I'm really speaking to a bigger vision that could be executed. So anyway, that's my backstory. I don't know if it helps you all or not, but
I have Vincent. I'm gonna have to take the lead on this because I have so many questions, so many things. First off, thanks for the shout out for Dennis Fowler. I did one of my minimal access surgery fellowships with him when he was at Columbia. I miss him. He's such a great man. He works. Where's he working now?
He's at a company called Savado. And so it is so odd, these doors that I said Adrian opened. Dennis is one of them. Savado is a company that's also something worth looking into. And Savado is the CEO is the fellow that developed Yulang Wang, who developed computer motion, which ultimately became intuitive, right?
Right.
And their VP is a former, their COO is a former VP of Premier, the GPO buying group, and he is the CTO. And Savado is developing a platform where they want to create a stable of expertise, surgical expertise. So Andrew, you might be one, and as an example, and around the world, put them on their native platform. So if you're using SSI, or if you're using, distal motion, or surgical incision, whatever the platform is, you would interface with their platform to then perform surgery 12,000 miles away. So they're creating that network of process, education, and interconnectivity that's agnostic to the surgical platform that will allow expertise to be distributed in a time frame when expertise is just not available. And they've got a very unique view of it. their platform has actually dropped latency down to about 10 milliseconds per 1,000 miles. It's unheard of.
You know, but what's also unheard of is who is figuring out who's going to get sued for a problem if your surgeon is in America, but they're doing the operation in Japan, and the surgeon in America doesn't have a medical license in Japan. So
Right.
there's we could and we have to, you know, that reminds me, we of course have to invite, we'll see if we can get 30 minutes of Dennis's time to do our podcast to discuss. I'm so curious how they plan on solving that, because, you know, as someone like myself who operates in many different parts of the world, that is a huge problem that is not going to be easily fixed. But as I'm learning, you can fix almost anything if you have enough money. But I
Right.
digress. I digress. You know, this is about the time in the podcast I like to point out that I majored in archaeology, and I like to go back even further. Ivan, where are you from? Where did you grow up? Go
Yeah,
back
so
even further, please.
so you know, it's kind of funny. My family's from South India, Kerala to be specific. Very unique subgroup of Keralites, from a place called, on my father's side, called Kumbanad. It means land of the elephants. I actually trace my lineage back to about 58 AD. We are a group of, you know, Kerala is one of the few Christian states in a very non-Christian country. And we trace our history back to, you know, it's Thomas, one of the disciples. And so I know my own history back about 350 to 400 years, when a prince of a princely state provided a significant amount of land to a progenitor of mine. And so all of our family has been, you know, leaders in each generation. And there's an expectation that they serve as such. I was actually the black sheep. My cousins are all older than me. They all became physicians. Some became, you know, professors of this, that, or the other, or engineers, scientists. So I was the one that actually didn't take the normal route. So that's where
I'm gonna stop you right there, because I meant to even stop you sooner about this. But before I get to my point, do Christians in India follow the class system? Like, could you be Christian and Brahmin at the same time, for instance?
You know, that's a real interesting question that I saw in a way that I wonder what my family. So I should preface this: if ever my family see this, I apologize to you all. So you know, I was in Kentucky. It's where I was born and raised. I was born in Eastern Kentucky, so I'm a hillbilly.
Wow.
But I was raised in Kentucky, in Lexington and Western Kentucky, and during the 70s. So I'm one of the first that was over here, right? From my group. And now we see, you know, here at Hopkins, I see Indians all the time. I see Carolites all the time. And, you know, some of these, you know, when I was growing up, I was the tall one. Now I'm kind of on the short guy. I'm 6'1".
Wow.
And what I saw was, you know, I didn't have those influences. So my view of the world is probably a little different than most folks. But to get back to your question specifically, I'm sorry, your specific question was?
Do Indian Christians
caste.
follow the caste
Yeah.
system?
So no. But what I had noticed, every society has a unique view of, everybody seems to be tribal and in groups, right? Here in the US and everywhere else.
Oh,
One
yes.
of the things I noticed that I found very unusual for Christians in my grandfather's time, you know, we were property owners in India, which is kind of in the upper class. New converts were treated differently than old converts.
Old money. And
That's right.
yeah.
And the reason is because there was a view that new converts were from lower castes who were trying to escape the caste system, right? Whereas some of these older folks, seem to maintain for generations a sense. So we will use the term, oh, I'm a descendant of Nayar Brahmins who converted in 58 AD, right? Why
Right.
are we saying that?
Yeah.
So if you're really Christian, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, you could be thief, you could be a,
Yeah.
you could be a harlot, you could be whatever, and you're converted and now you're okay. But that maintained. And so there's also a separation of an understanding that you are in a caste-based system. So for example, my mother lived in the Indian backwaters, and instead of roads, they had rivers, and people would sell their wares. You could have a haircut on a boat. You could have pots, pans, fish, food brought to you. My grandfather would go fishing with me. My father would never put a rod or reel in the water. It was anathema to him, and so it was to most people. My grandfather just broke it because it was me, right?
Yeah.
But there's a sense of that's only a certain caste does that fishing. So why is my grandfather doing that, right?
Yeah.
Or are we taking away from their livelihood? So it has two sides to it. One social engineering, the other is social placement. And this may be my view, but I think if you do some reading or whatever, you'll find that that probably makes sense.
Well, is amazing. It's almost like this this podcast is writing itself, because what I wanted to bring up was I actually love what you said earlier, how really medicine surgery has become in these silos. Like, we don't know what the gynecologists are doing, we don't know what the brain surgeons are doing, and there's really no cross-pollination. And one of the things we're trying to do with our journals, we're trying to define what we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to be AI and HPV surgery? Are we trying to, focus on this and focus on that? And what I've realized, what I find the most interesting, is to really try to keep it as broad as possible. We just did a webinar on AI and cardiac surgery, run by Dr. Zane Kalpi in Arizona, and I learned so much from seeing how the cardiac surgeons are thinking about robotics and AI, that I actually love. I kind of love your perspective, and I actually think you're because I've talked to you, and you know so much more about robotics than most any surgeon that I've talked to. And I actually one of the reasons I wanted you on here was that you could help educate people and broaden their mind. And so I think that's a huge richness that you bring to the table, which obviously I'm not the only one who has seen, but obviously all these these leaders that you're talking about have been eager to share with the world. And with that, I will kind of ask you, before I let poor Vincent ask you some questions, how, two questions I'm going to leave you with. Tell us, please, about the Star robot, if it is at Hopkins, because it's always a mystery where that is and what's going on with that. And two, if you know what, I'm going to wait for my second questions, because I want you to answer that and then let Vincent chime in, and then we'll talk a little bit about the mantra.
So, I'm sensitive to how I'm about to answer this question for you. So I'm going to answer it generically and see if you're going to follow along with where I'm going with this. As with large academic centers, especially older ones, there are a lot of silos. And so here we are talking about silos between disciplines, right? We see silos between disciplines here. We see silos between researchers here and development teams. I am working on, I can't get into the details, but I'm working on a project where I have now learned that an entire other team, where one of them is actually in my department, we are unaware of what the other one was doing. And so to get to your point about Star or the others, I will definitely confirm that there are development efforts going on around that and a few other systems. One of the ones I feel more free to talk about, for example, is Galen. Galen is a system that's out there that basically reminds me a lot of ASOP, if you remember the ASOP system. And you would think, well, what use does that have? But they're aiming it for ENT. where they're doing oral thyroidectomy and other things where they want very small movements, or they want to remove intention tremor. So they're using robot assisted or mechanically assisted movement where they can retrace path and do that and the other. That was only recently kind of brought into our realm and out. So so I will leave it at yes, I know there's work being done on that particular robot and others, but
My goodness, I didn't realize what a tough question I gave you.
you
The reason I
did.
like to talk about the Star robot, of course, is because it's, I'm very interested in autonomous actions in surgery, and they of course have a very beautiful example of autonomous action, which is why I like to refer to it and talk about it. But with that, I will take you off the hook. And Vincent, so what do you think of what you've been hearing from this robotic guru? I think you're more than a fly on the wall. You're more of a robotics guru, is the way I look at you, Ivan.
And it's quite impressive, Ivan. Yeah, it's nice to see you got your hands in a lot of the moving parts of this whole evolving landscape, and you have you're kind of like the hawk looking down on the landscape as everybody's running around and on your little perch up there, but you're also involved in helping companies make decisions and moving forward in an interesting manner. I'm really intrigued with with Dr. Fowler's company. And they have I think you said a 10 millisecond delay at over 1,000-mile transmission, which is really fast. Andrew, we have a paper that we wrote a while back where you can't really do surgery if there's 100 millisecond delay, right? It's just too dangerous. 10 milliseconds is pretty fast, right? That's an order of magnitude better. So I'd be interested to learn on how they're handling the interconnects on their fiber cables to be able to get that latency down. What's interesting is, I guess 50 years ago, the surgeon didn't have around his ecosystem many influencers or people that could really dictate what he did, right? There weren't technologists in the room. The bureaucrats weren't it was kind of run by, the surgeons had enormous power and influence. Now we're seeing more people with their hands in the practice of surgery. There's the technologists, a lot more technologists, a lot more business people. The economics are being looked at differently. The regulatory stuff is crazy. And surgeons go through a lot of training, and then they kind of, the surgeons graduate general surgery, and then they find themselves in this strange world of having gone through enormous training, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of what they had done in the past has slipped away. So I'm always interested, how do you motivate general surgeons not to go do fellowships and finish a general surgery residency after they get the kind of taste that they see down where you are, and then they find themselves in surgical practice that's not as advertised in some ways. It's kind of, how do you motivate people to become just general surgeons? And I don't know. I'm hearing a lot of the unhappiness from the surgical residents that I know. What are your feelings on education for our general surgery residents?
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that. It's not just general surgery. It's I have some dear close friends over the years that I've come to know, a Harvard trained OBGYN who ran a center for Center of Excellence for Women's Healthcare, another one who is a chairman of anesthesiology at a major medical center. And the underlying message is, I love being a physician. The surgeon says, I'm a surgeon when I wake up. Dr. Park is a great example. I'm a surgeon when I wake up. I'm a surgeon when I go to bed. I'm not an administrator. And the degree of unhappiness I see right now is, again, this is truly being the fly on the wall, right? I'm not leading in these areas. At Hopkins, my role is to facilitate my PIs being able to move forward and get done what they want to get done. And so it also leads to a bit of frustration. So for the practicing physician, I'm really concerned. I see legislation change. Not sure what that's based on sometimes. You got legislators practicing medicine without a license and attempting to make a bad situation better. But, there's that saying in engineering, when you execute a solution, there's a whole host of unanticipated consequences.
Who's
And
operating without a license? What was that? Sorry. What?
That's a personal pet peeve of mine. I happen to feel that legislators are a lot of
Oh,
legislators are operating, are basically practicing medicine without a
oh,
license.
okay, I love it. Oh,
When you start dictating that, and we sort of in the medical field, I really think my goal is to put true thought leaders, physicians should be leading. And I'm not saying they're not. I think the system has moved them off to the side. But in the apocalypse, I know it's going to be a physician that helps me, not me. I mean, I have some clinical background, so maybe I can help. But most administrators and most support staff, at the end of the day, that's not where the answer is. And so we really don't understand the pain point. Now, in large systems, I don't expect the chef to understand the chain of process on how that high-end meat got to the cook, but I do expect the chef to understand how they fixed it. But to get to your point about the student part, for many years I was I've worn many hats. I was a fellowship coordinator as well. And actually, to Andrew, your roommate and good friend of ours, and
Steve Kavik.
Steve Kavik, right? Program director at University of Maryland, former Yale. And somewhere something happened in 2014, 2015. I started having residents come to my door as I sat on those admissions committee with Dr. Park and the rest of the faculty. And I would also do the tour. And the question was always, am I going to get to use the robot? That progressively became almost that year something happened. It became, and this is a series of one, but I saw dozens and dozens of fellows each year, well, tens, maybe 100, every one of them asking, am I going to get to use the robot? And I don't know that they had a broad enough view of it. They were kind of the Xbox Nintendo generation, and this is another bright, shiny toy. And Intuitive did a very excellent job of making robotics sexy, right? And the laparoscopic world, I don't know that they were sending the same message. I've had this conversation with a few. I nervously had it as a kid. I felt like a kid, but I nervously had this conversation with about 5 or 6 luminaries in MIS recently, where I said, you all are risking being the party of anti-robot, as opposed to Intuitive that's really just driven it home. So Sages, for example, has 5,000 people, that 5 to 8,000 people that attend annually, right? And maybe some meetings in the middle. But the International Robotic Collaborative online on Facebook has 15,000 people who are minute by minute getting new indoctrination. So these residents are, it's a weird situation. Fewer hours, high expectations, frustration with what's expected of them in practice. It could be unrealistic. Now, here at Hopkins, the worldview is that we're going to lead. So we are using robotics, and we know that we are. There's always the struggle of, are we giving them enough open and laparoscopic and then robotic, so that they know what to do when they go to everywhere else? 11.5% of all ORs in the United States have a robot. But that's all in major population centers. And that means most of our residents are not going there. What are they going to do when they get to a situation where something, place doesn't have robotics, where it doesn't fail, where they can't make a profit margin that makes sense? See, that's the other crazy part. The average hospital margin, forget the professional fee, is around 2%, 2.5%. In the state of Maryland, where I am, it's set by the state. Every hospital maintains the exact same rate based on a state agency. It can be 2%, 1%, 0, or negative 1%, depending on the year and what they decide. getting to your question, again, a long way around it, all of these factor into what these residents are going through. And some of them have insight enough to know, oh boy, I need to be worried. Is the fellowship going to help me get further? Will it not? And then you've got the cultural issues of, what generation are they from and how do they think about work-life balance? So that was a packed answer. I'm so sorry. You asked me a very simple question and there's too many factors on that to answer it cleanly.
So the good and the bad news is we have just under 3 minutes for you to tell us a little bit about the Mantra robot. And I know, and good luck with that. When we have about 30 seconds left, I will warn you. So
yeah, no, I will tell you the quick and easy answer about the Mantra is that, there are about 133 robots out there right now. There are probably only 5 or 6 that I think qualify for MIS robots. So we would be looking at Hugo. We would be looking at, if Titan were still in the game fully, we'd be looking at Atava, if it is really in the game or not. I mean, people have seen it behind closed doors. Distal Motion has some opportunities. Its only indication for use right now is really in the Abwal world. So there are these systems coming out. The Mantra shocks me. It shocked me. I was not expecting it. This is a former Intuitive kind of acolyte, Dr. Srivastava, Senior, Sudhir, who really wanted to get involved in cardiac. And, if you compare robotics to the auto world, well, maybe Intuitive is Ford. And you get one color, black, right? And you may get the Model A, now we're at the Model T, and they have each little features. But the problem is that, I don't even know if Intuitive will pursue cardiac as an example. So there is that problem. Mantra kind of came out in the last year and a half with their System 2, their Mantra 2, and we have one here.
And now they're up to 3, by the way.
They're up to 3, and which has some amazing innovations. But I saw this thing, literally a year and a half ago, and realized System 5, DV5, just came out about 2 months ago. They already had 4K imaging. They already had a reticulated hybrid scope that they were using. Their instrumentation was much cheaper. 85% of that system was made in India, manufactured and designed, but they're actually a US company out of Delaware and Florida. And they took a very interesting approach. They realized they wanted to democratize robotics. They know there's a need in places that I never dreamed would approach. I was part of that group that said, 6 billion people on the planet will never see robotic surgery and their children won't. But here we now see they're taking a real bite out of Intuitive in India.
Oh, perfect. I have to cut you off right there. We're running out of time. Ivan, we're going to have you back on again.
Love to.
It's been fantastic. Vincent, I'm not even going to give you time to say goodbye because we are down to just a few